Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Nishant Shrivastava.
Thanks, Ray. This is the RayWenderlich.com podcast. Welcome to episode 1 for season 11. This episode was recorded on Saturday, the 21st of November, 2020, for release on the 9th of December. This episode is sponsored by the language Scala and by the imaginary number I. I'm Dru Freeman, along with my partner in crime, Nishant Shrivastava.
Thanks, Dru. In this episode, we begin our dive into the book Living by the Code and talk with Paco Estévez García, who is a software engineer working with developer productivity and performance tools. He enjoys functional programming and video game development.
Paco, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good. And yourself?
All good.
Enjoying a little bit of the Spanish sun. We're getting a couple of 20 degrees days here, so I'm really happy that I can get some sunlight in my skin and not be dragged in London like
So
it's usually around this time.
Where in Spain are you?
I'm from the central parts, the boring parts. I call it the Spanish Midwest for the Americans, so they get a frame of reference. So you go out and there's basically wheat fields and cows and that kind of
That's an
place.
interesting place to be in.
But the weather, you're closer to the equator, so the weather's nicer.
Exactly. We still have 15, 20 degrees around this time. The crops are doing okay. It's plenty of sunlight. And probably we have a couple of New Years where it was proper sunny. And I love that basically.
Oh, that's wonderful. So where is Spain right now as far as things like lockdown? Are you currently in a lockdown or is it still more open in there?
It's so and so. So basically, I cannot go out after 10 p.m., which means this interview is right after the interview. I can run off, just get a little bit of fresh air, and then go back home. and other than that, some small towns are locked when they have a little break. They have a handful of people getting COVID at the same time, kind of thing, and you cannot cross certain communities. But basically, if you're in your small town and you're not minding anybody else, I think it's pretty safe. Everybody's wearing masks. Everybody's just using the gel. Everybody's making sure that everybody else is not getting the COVID because we know we're in this together, and we want to get out as soon as possible.
We really do. Yeah, I every now and then I look at the webpage, where can Americans travel right now? And the list is just so short. But then again, I don't think anybody wants Americans to go traveling anywhere right now.
We don't say it out loud.
We know the truth. So assuming you're not locked down, what do you typically do for fun outside?
So for a little bit, I'm following a lot of Twitter, what the kids these days call doom scrolling, which is just following the news and seeing the latest development and seeing election and all that kind of stuff. But watching conferences, reading books, still following all the development, the parts of the development community that I'm interested in. That's something that I do even on my spare time. And then I have the usual suspect of Netflix show, video games. I play board games a lot, whether it's physical, solo, or digital over tabletop simulator. Sometimes I make my own print and plays with some games that I bought in Kickstarter or something, because that's apparently what relaxes me. Just being with a pair of scissors, just thinking it didn't work today, but I'm going to make it work tomorrow.
I'm currently working on a game simulator with my son, and it's I have no background in game development whatsoever, so it's been a learning process for both of us. He's learning how coding works, and I'm learning the concepts of game simulations. So that's a bit of a journey. So obviously, this is the whole idea of this came from the idea of we read Living by the Code, and a lot of us sat down and said, God, I'd love to just sit down at a bar with this person and pick their brain for more and ask them more details. So that's sort of where we're going to be going with this, because you said so many great things in the book, and we want to pick your brain for a little bit more of these gems that you have.
Oh, sounds like a lot of fun. I really enjoy this. I heard Ray Wenderlich is providing the beers for the bar. I'm waiting for the delivery, just saying.
Well, if it goes off of the account that we have for the podcast, I wouldn't hold my breath. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was that you talked about Pratchett's Night Watch as one of the books that really affected you.
Yes.
And you use the phrase that it changed your raison de vivre. I've heard people say the raison d'être, their reason to be, but you said raison de vivre, which is more reason to live. And I'm curious, how did it affect you? Why did you choose that phrase?
First, I'm uneducated, so probably I got it wrong. I need to correct that for the second edition. But it was something like that. It was basically like, I'm from this small town. The possibilities in here are very limited, whether where I was growing up or right now. And it was the case, actually, I don't have it in here. But for a number of years, I used to have like a panel strip hanging above this wall. This is like where the room where I grew up, and some of my things are still here. And the panel set is a picture of like a dad and a son in like a typical rural environment, and the dad is just telling the son, study and get out. Like that's literal. That's what passes as a comic strip in like a local paper, and I had that hanging over my wall because that was the thing that my parents told me when I was young. Study, do something that you enjoy, and like get out of here. And when I started thinking like, what is the kind of life that you can see outside of Spain, and I read the Terry Pratchett books, so it's like this is completely different to the kind of people that I've met and the things that I've enjoyed. This is big city life, even if it's like fantasy big city life. You can see some of the parts of like English countryside kind of thing. It's okay, maybe this is something that I want to enjoy for a number of years. I'm gonna go abroad. I want to meet these people. I want to see what is it like out there. And my space was very limited up until the point when I went to university. So you can talk about diversity, you can talk about anything else. Like I didn't get to meet people from very far from my town up until I was 18. And then all of a sudden, it all happened in a very short period of time. And like 6 years later, I was living abroad. And now it's like 15 years later, and I've been living abroad for that long. And I've met people from everywhere. I've went to like all the way from California to Asia to everywhere else. And it all started on those books, like saying, hey, there's a little bit more out there than small, very enjoyable rural life, but there's a little bit more, and I enjoy that a lot.
Your quote at the beginning is, code's not always the hardest part of the job. It's still interpersonal relationships. Communicating with stakeholders, gathering information. Colleague once always said to me, it's not a code problem, it's a people problem.
Yes, very, very correct, very wise.
And I'm curious, what is the journey of learning how to deal with the different types of people?
It's a long journey. It's something that you're accumulating over time, right? The first job that I joined in, it was a group of personalities that were developing this mobile. Actually, it was a game application where you have somebody that was really introvert. You have some colleagues that were young as I was. There were some people that were in the middle. So the seniors wanted to see the juniors code more. And as you move across different jobs and at different teams and you meet more people, you start seeing repeating patterns of personality, but at the same time, you start seeing a little bit more variety. So you start forming your own playbook. It's like, okay, here's a tough, hard-earned person who likes things straight and wants to get things done. What can work for him? This is his intrinsic or his extrinsic motivations to get things done. And then you try to align yourself or to empathize with what they want, why do they want it, and how you can get a result out of that. And sometimes there's conflict, sometimes there's people who are not willing to cooperate, and you have to get yourself out of the situation because that's also part of the job. So by getting yourself into a lot of trouble, by making a lot of mistakes, so many mistakes, and learning from them, probably that's the two important parts. You made the mistake and then you learn and then you apply the changes. At the end, you're still doing terribly, but at least you can keep the right spots with the right people and get some of those things out.
You mentioned empathy, and how do you teach or encourage empathy, or better yet, well, it's sort of a two-sided question. How do you encourage or teach empathy, and then how do we deal with those who just can't do it?
Oh, that's a good one. Those who can do it, actually, they end with the problems themselves. I wouldn't say it's a self-sorting problem, but on the long term, it kind of happens. So if you have one person who cannot work with anybody else, they're not going to work with anybody else. People are going to be complaining. There's going to be a lot of churn around that person. And then he's going to be moving companies, moving projects, or he's going to be isolated in a project by themselves. And at that point, like, the career is hitting almost a dead end. So I've seen this happen where people who were technically brilliant, you could not work with them. And what happened after 6 months or after a year, you realize, hey, how's your project going? I cannot get any traction. Why? Well, I'm coding 12 hours a day. I'm coding weekends, and still I'm not getting the job done. It's like, yeah, because that's a two-person job, but nobody wants to work with you. So either you play nice and then we help you, or you don't, and we're not going to want to help you, and the company is going to lose for it. So the managers are going to have to intervene to solve that problem, because somebody's actually a productivity net loss for the company, even if it's like a productivity positive as an individual. And that's not good.
I've faced that more than once, obviously, in my career, but the really terrifying situation is when you get that one non-empathetic engineer who's very brilliant and is the pet student of the manager. So the rest of the team is off to the side trying to deal with this, and there's basically no traction to fix the problem. Then what I see is there's a lot of churn in that department. You turn over. We talked about that team and how it had turned over 11 employees on a 4-person team in 2 years.
I've seen that. I've seen that. I mean, I've been out of that situation myself. And what happened in your case?
I left.
I've definitely seen similar situations myself, and in those cases, there's this star employee, as you call them, and they're basically trying to take up most of the work and try to do everything on their own. But obviously, because they're not as empathetic and they're not trying to do the work with other people, work together with them, mostly that has not worked out, and people obviously leave around them, or they are the ones jumping between companies because no one wants to work with them. So yeah, so that's something I feel like is also something that everyone is possibly seeing in the current generation, as well as like obviously in the past also.
Yeah. I think you see less of it now in that general move toward agile in the workplace, predominantly because everybody does have to work with each other. Everybody has to account for tasks and not take off too much. I think the days of the raw meat coder who you basically would shove requirements under their door and they would churn out code, and that's about their entire social life. I think that's really fading away.
At least from what I've seen, in larger companies, there tends to be a lot of inter-department communication, right? I was in Reuters, and I was working we were the mobile development team, and we have to work with people in Minnesota. And these people in Minnesota, they were 3 different teams who also collaborated with people in London, but in a different department. And you have to interact with all those people just to get something out of the door. The technical part, like, you can sit down and code in a weekend. Like, getting those people to agree what the technical bits are, what is the deployment rate, who's going to own it long term, and those kind of things, that's something that has to be part of your skill set. If it isn't, it's not that you're useless, but you're going to need somebody who is complementing those skills for you. And at that point, you're not the star employee. You and the other person are the star employees together, and you are useless without that person who can do it for you. So again, it's a problem that is not really well sustained. Something that I've seen happening in the past, instead of going, you mentioned that you saw that the engineer was the manager's pet. I've gone to the skip. You say, okay, I'm gonna jump like 1 or 2 layers above, and I'm gonna tell them like, hey, you know that a lot of people are leaving. Is this your problem, or is this not a problem for you? And if this is not a problem for the company, as you say, I'm out. You're just gonna,
Yeah, I did the managerial jump to work on a project that I enjoyed working on. But the further problem was that the manager himself was incredibly toxic and dangerous. And after a while, that's where the turnover was coming from, was just a very toxic and dangerous manager. And there's not much you can do about that, especially if that manager is the pet of somebody higher up or has some blackmail material on somebody higher in the food chain. I don't know.
Harsh.
I don't know.
But,
You're out. Like, that's the response. Yeah.
Yeah, but we are talking about more or less, I think, communication here between these different employees or like engineers. Do you think that is the one that, if improved, could lead to better results in these situations or not?
You need those great engineers to lead some of those projects, right? And seniority can go both ways. The way that you can grow as an engineer is actually being able to handle more scope, but more scope doesn't mean more code or your code base is larger. It's actually, the 10 people who are responsible for the different parts, and you make sure they coordinate with your own efforts. So between everybody else, you get the work done. Like that's the real superpower, is horizontal scaling. Like it's cache and horizontal scaling. You cannot cache your own stuff. Maybe you can write libraries, but other than that, like horizontal scaling is the only solution. And for that, you need to influence more and more people, and influence in a good sense, like inspire if you prefer, or leadership kind of thing. If you try to reign by fear or something very similar, like the team may turn out something good once or twice, but it tends not to be a repeating pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good formula to have.
No,
I like you said, you learn from the mistakes and then you grow from them. In my current position as an architect, I've been blessed to basically be the one who nurtures the engineers. And I found one engineer who really began to shine early on. And every time a new project would come up or a special leading type thing, I would basically direct to her. I tell the scrum masters, etc., let's put her on this project to nurture her, and she's basically become one of our top lead developers as a result. And it's being able to nurture those folks who stand out or have the potential.
Yeah,
and helping them grow, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I believe that's one of the most underrated things in the industry, is that you can actually grow talent. And I read about this a while ago. I think it was Joel on Software or somebody from that perspective, saying there's a whole handful of people who are just coming out of university. And at the moment where they leave university, they may not be useful, but they have that potential. And then they grow that potential within one company. And then the next time they jump to the next one, they understand their own value. So they're going to be choosing the next one that they jump over and number of times over. So actually, the only time that you have to get them is when they're just coming out of university. Afterwards, they just disappear from their market that you have visibility on. So you're actually better off getting them young, growing them up, fixing some of like those problems, and then at some point you have to let them go, or you have to take somebody similar. But during that period of time, they're going to be doing like such a great job. And there are many companies who are making use of that policy. And you can see it on the results. You can see that they're able to get a lot of things done because these people have the energy and they have the potential, and they are not as limited on some of the preconceptions that you may have. And I've seen that. I've seen people doing that, and oh my God, it's so enjoyable.
I appreciate your statement, how you nurture them along and then they go to their next job, trusting their abilities. That part I could still use. I've been in the industry 35 years and I still don't trust my abilities.
Okay, maybe there's a bit of hubris when you're young and you're still doing
I still sit there going, oh, I guess I can do that. Oh, yay.
We start at the beginning, and then we basically nurture them till they are good enough, and maybe nurture future generations or like the new set of software engineers who are coming in. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. But do you think in the current situation that we have right now, the pandemic and everything, and everything shifting to remote work, is that gonna be affecting the flow of how we do this, how we approach this, or also in terms of like the communication process between different teams, as we mentioned earlier, would those be affected in a certain way that would be detrimental maybe, or would it go into the positive direction because we have now more communication happening over video calls and like over standard calls? And obviously there's so much content out there that the people, those who are coming out of the university, they could also now grab onto all this information. They can read up the Living by the Code book, right? And they can start thinking about these concepts more often than they would have in, say, 10 years back or something, right?
Something that I've seen, like I'll put one example because it's an easy one. Like I have one cousin who's still in university. He's finishing electrical engineer or something, and I told him like, hey, why don't you get an internship at one large company, whatever, NVIDIA, AMD, Apple, whatever, like one of them that is hardware. It's like, I don't feel like living in Spain right now. Like things are not good. And it's like, that's perfect. Because right now, all the internships are happening remote. So if you want to do it from like your parents' house on no budget at all and make money for 3 to 6 months, now is the right time. You can do it. We're hiring, like I've seen people hire from everywhere around the globe on condition that they move to the place where they have to be working on, right? And this is happening to every one of us. And even when you talk to recruiters these days, they are sending you always messages in LinkedIn and you tease them, right? And you go like, do you accept fully remote? Because I have a beach in like southern Spain that I really want to live in with this house. And they just go like, oh no, sorry, like London only or whatever, Singapore, or these other places. It's like, you're missing out, right? You're missing out on the beach too. I could invite you if you wanted to come, but I think that's the biggest improvement. Now, day-to-day communication, it's a little bit harder because, well, depending on your personality, but me myself, I will just go and like crumple a bowl and just throw it at one of my colleagues while they're focused because I'm that kind of like, nasty person. But naughty person. Sorry. And English, right? How does it work? I spent a couple of weeks in Spain and I forgot everything about it. But yeah, those kind of interactions with just people are just like, why are you throwing me the balls? And then it's like Nerf gun or whatever, like something that makes a little bit of like personality. Whereas right now, if I want to talk to somebody, I need to either schedule a call or like open a chat window and then schedule the call. I cannot annoy them in an active way, in a way that shows like this love and this respect for the other person.
This love and respect for their autonomy. It's just like, you must really miss AOL Instant Messenger with that whole thing that would make their whole screen bounce.
Yes. I miss that. I don't know, when we were teenagers, we used to like call each other and just go like one beep or one buzz or something and then hang out. It was like a poke, right? And we would just spend hours poking each other kind of thing. And yeah, I was annoying. I'm still annoying, but in a different way, in a more mature and wise way, right?
Yes, having fun with your colleagues is something that maybe probably is not possible as of now, but hopefully in future we can definitely do that.
Yeah. I have to add in that Ray, when he talked about running a fully remote company, talked about the idea that you have conferences, but you make sure they're video conferences, because it's too easy to lose track of a person when it's strictly audio. When it's video, you do get the face, you do get the intermix with the person. And my company, everything obviously, like everybody else, is remote right now. But our conferences are often 16 to 30 blocks with just names in them. And I always leave my video on. Sometimes I'm the only one in the room doing it, but it's an ability for people to see me and see my reaction to things. And the number of times I yawn.
Oh, I'm still not there. I'm still not there on the yawning yet. I could. Some meetings I'm just like, here's Twitter on the side. I'm like scrolling a little bit while people are talking. But
you've got that schedule. You said in Living by the Code, you said that you do a couple of hours midday, then you stop, and then you do a couple of hours after midnight.
Yes, exactly.
That's not necessarily a luxury everybody has.
No, I understand. And I've been like, this was something that was asked to me very often, especially like I was more active in open source, let's say 2 or 3 years ago. Also, fewer responsibilities, more work, more time, like no lockdown kind of thing. And that was basically it. I said, okay, I'm still gonna go for drinks with my friends. I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. But after midtime is me time, and I'm gonna get 2 or 3 hours, and that's about it. That time is time that all the people spend either sleeping, going on dates, or doing some other stuff. And for myself, I found more enjoyment doing this kind of things. And I understand it was a trade-off. I don't know if it was a good one. I don't know if it was a mistake. And at some point in the last year, let's say a year and a half or so, I said, okay, I'm going to start doing a little bit less of open source, and I'm going to start going out, and I'm going to get myself back into the dating sites, and I'm going to start doing these things. And it's a trade-off that you have to make. And I told this also to some intern and junior engineers that I've spoken to. They tell me like, oh, if I work 12 hours for the next 5 years, I'm going to be rich by 30. It's like, yes. What would happen then? Like, what have you done? Today I was going for a walk with my dad, and we were having a joke. It's like, yeah, I talked to these people. They started working by 24. They were like great. They're senior engineers, and by 24, I have a distinct memory of being incredibly drunk in Germany, like incredibly drunk with a friend, because that's the stuff that we did when we were 24, or like even in university or those kind of things. For me, it was not that immediate jump of like study, work 12 hours a day, being rich by 30. I'm not there yet. I'm not rich yet, sadly.
I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable, but I've also taken a slower path, and I'm happy with that. So you've opened the door to open source, and we should probably ask you some of these questions. We should probably, because you talk quite a bit about open source, and you're quite a contributor to open source. And one of the real important topics was some of the difficulties that you face, or some of the difficulties found in contributing to open source. What do you find is the reluctance in companies from open source? I know that some companies don't like open source, and what do you feel are those reluctancies?
So the first one, and it was the most clear, is an IP problem, right? Some companies have a department that is not comfortable with intellectual property rights, and understanding the difference between, or not understanding, but wanting to deal with the nuances of what code can be public and what code can be private, and can we get sued for private code because we have done something public, and the license requires that all code related to this is actually open sourceable. So that is time that you have to take from your lawyers that becomes money. And at some point, if your company is not like very tech aligned, that feels like overhead. That overhead is also the reason why other companies can't do it. So you can say, okay, we're going to have an open source policy, and that open source policy serves a purpose. And the purpose can be either we need external contributions, we want more hiring, we want to hire some of those contributors that are happening externally, or simply we want for people to understand our technology better so they can come up with their own solutions, integrations in our own platform. Those are things that I've seen companies do, but as a strategy. I found it more rare that companies do things without any reason, or the engineers are doing it behind the business reasons for doing it. I imagine it still happens for like small places, but most of the time it needs to be a business reason, even if the business reason is this engineer won't shut up about it, and it's small enough that it doesn't matter, and they feel strongly about it. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy with people like pushing for that within their own companies. And sometimes if you see that return from that initial experience saying, hey, actually, this saved us N number of hours, so we got a number of contributions, or even we have influence in a space that is kind of tangential to our whole ecosystem. Let's say that you have an app that is working on like healthcare. Oh, we have a really good protocol that is starting to be used by other apps or by several doctors. That means that we can grab a little bit more of the business side because we know more doctors would be interested in that kind of API, or they're integrating with it, or we see that somebody's made a third-party tool, and this is something that we can also do within the business. So you hire that person in to build that experience within the company. That's also very frequent. So there can be a symbiotic relationship between the companies and the people doing open source. That is only from like the company and employee and an external perspective. That's not even about like I do open source for fun or for my own self-interest, or I have my own script tooling for these print and play games. I have my own set of scripts that are open source. So you can throw a couple of images from cards or something, and it comes out with like a really nice layout. I put it in a group, say, hey, everybody who's doing print and plays, I have this open source tool that you can use this for yourself. And that's also enjoyable, and you share that with people, and people are happy about it. So plenty of good reasons to do open source. Just get on it.
You talked about some of the hurdles for newer programmers for open source, mentioning, I've got to find it now because it jumped out at me, snobism and gatekeeping.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to read this. I don't like reading a lot out of a book, but it's on each of us to be the ones taking the first step to make sure that your specific community is welcoming, that you're getting people from every avenue of life, you're teaching them, and you don't think of it in terms of what you're doing for them. Think of it instead of building something together. And this really resonated to me because I had just read an article about what makes up a fan in science fiction.
Yeah.
Which sounds completely different and unrelated, but it's that same concept of it doesn't matter how much they're contributing. If they want to contribute or if they want to be part of it, they're part of it. They're in the community just by showing their interest in it, and that should be nurtured.
Yes. Same as you're in Discord or any of these places. So you can see this is very, okay, you go into the animation community. I follow a lot of animators on Twitter because I like animation, and they come up with this collab. And it's like they're going to do an episode of maybe like, I don't remember the English name for the show, but it's one like from Nickelodeon. It's a dog and it's scared of everything. And they did a whole episode out of like 5-second cuts from animators from all over the world for free. I saw another project. They're making a board game from Fire Emblem, which is a Nintendo IP, but every single drawing is drawn by a different artist. And they're just putting it together. They're making a board game, and they're selling it for like pennies for each one of them because they feel like doing it. There's no big story about it. It's just like, I can do it. I can collaborate with other people. I feel joy when I do this, and it brings joy to third parties. And I think of open source the same way. If I join a project and they tell me like, this is not good enough, you're not from a big enough company, you're never going to be able to support it. I've heard them all. Like, I've heard them all. You're to focus on X, Y, and Z, and people being like nasty. Now is the right nasty, not right, you're nasty, being nasty to you. And it's like, why is this happening? I'm just here to enjoy myself. I'm not doing this for a bigger reason or for a big story or for self-promotion. Some of it you can do for self-promotion, but some of it you just do it for fun. And that's the kind of people that I wanted to find. And when I was working on this project Arrow with all the rest of the Spaniards and some of the people that came in, like after a couple of months, it was like friends. These are my friends. These are the people, when we go to conferences, we get together, we get these beers, we walk around, we tell stories, we meet with other people, we make a front. And I can imagine the same for like doctors or everybody else. It's a community, right? And communities are a big thing in and out of the internet, and it's one that you're building around the passion that you have, which is building software of a kind, or building a product, or building something that you find enjoyable. If you want to contribute to a large project with commercial interest, there's a good chance you're going to be turned away because they have commercial interest and they're gathering, or the way that they're doing the open source is geared towards a strategy of which you may not be part in. You can become part of by fulfilling the tasks for that project, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're one of the in-group. Some of them you could not, but that's for me, that's a small difference that makes the whole world.
You have to also be careful because the open source world is open enough that you can wind up creating a community without intending it. I came across some old code on GitHub that was in an old language, and it was in. I know I'm the iOS guy, so it was in Objective-C, and I wanted it in Swift. So I did some edits on it, and the guy basically said, "That's great. You own it now."
Yes.
GitHub is definitely a place where you can find out you touch it, you own it. So
that also happens in large code bases, I found. Like, you can become the expert. Well, not even small code bases. Like, haven't you ever been in a job and said, "Oh, the build system is kind of funny. Let's make it better." And all of a sudden, you're the CI person.
Yep.
Yes.
You're the CI person. Everybody has a CI.
Well, I mean, in a really huge company, because I worked for Microsoft well over many years ago, and with that there isn't great churn in the company, but the churn is sufficient in the developers that some of the code is older than some of the developers working on it.
Yes,
so you can find yourself being thrown a bug, finding out that person not only doesn't work for the company, he's retired, he's died, and you are now the owner of that specific feature.
When you said retired, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, and you fix it, so now you are the owner of it now. Like, you're
not the expert on it. You're not the owner. You're the expert. You're the person people are going to start coming to while you're still there.
Exactly. Yeah. When you say they're retired now, I was going to say, and now they're happy. And then you say, now they died. It's like, okay, not happy. Not happy. Go ahead.
But talking about all the things around open source of how you end up being in like these projects, or like how do you even get into that? I initially had this problem when I was starting up in my career, and I actually wanted to get into open source. And somehow I did not find a project that was like probably welcoming enough in my case, which allowed me to maybe contribute. I did try a couple of times, and then what I ended up doing is I ended up creating a repository for myself. This one is called Android Examples. It's just small Android examples that anyone could just download and run it. And it will demonstrate a single functionality. So eventually what it ended up being is that a lot of newcomers who wanted to get into open source would start opening pull requests into that. And this repository now has more than 100 examples right now. So even though I'm maintaining it, but what I've also found out is that these repositories or these special open source code that has less barrier of entry, as in it's easier for people to start doing the contribution, has helped them. It helped me, obviously, as this repository grew over time, and then more people started contributing. So I think, so making sure that you find the right repository to contribute is also important. Otherwise, like if you jump into something that has, as Paco already said, you have something like a commercial interest, it becomes a bit hard to contribute in those areas. But yeah, obviously there is a bit of a barrier of entry that I've also seen myself.
Something that I've heard people say, and this is the same when you get on your first job or maybe your first couple, or maybe after many years, you're worried that other people are that you don't know about certain things, so that your code is wrong or that things are going bad, and people is unhappy about your things. And if you put yourself out there, they're gonna start throwing tomatoes at you. And I found that in reality, like, nobody cares. That's in a good and in a bad sense. So if I got a bad reaction or a negative reaction every time I put something out, like it would be so much better, because at least I got a reaction. But most of the time you say, I built these things, 2 stars, 3 stars, 5 stars. Like, if somebody spends their time pushing you down and like throwing tomatoes at you, it's like, oh, okay, at least somebody cares enough that they can do something about it. But most of the time it disappears on the noise on the internet. There's too much stuff going on. So actually promoting your project so other people can throw tomatoes at it is also part of the things that you can do for fun. And it feeds both ways, both for your regular job and for open source. You learn how to do certain things about dealing with people who come for questions, who come from answers, who like interact with you, and you can apply the approaches that you take in open source to work, and you can take the approaches that you take to work to open source, and kind of like it helps you grow. Some of these people that we started doing the Arrow project together, we grew in a way that we like do versioning control, modularization, dealing with community requests, dealing with nasty people coming to the issues and saying like everything is broken, with the people saying functional programming it's a fad and you're all frauds, that kind of thing. And those things we couldn't deal well with like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe some of the contributors could, but you learn as you gain experience. So it's another way of like adding additional experience, and maybe in places that you cannot exercise on your day-to-day job. And I believe that's also really good. It's not like in every job. You cannot do like practice surgeon outside of work. Like maybe you can have like a potato and like, a grape and like sewing in and out, but you cannot have like a human being that you can practice on, and you cannot practice law in your like living room, but you can practice programming and like community building in your living room, and that's also really helpful. So you could use that opportunity. At the same time, it's not mandatory. If you don't feel like it, if you value some other things more, if you prefer your time to be spent hiking or something else, like that's completely valuable. I also don't believe that we should just, if that is not on your CV, you're not committed enough. That's also, it's not about that for me at all.
So speaking of your CV, you mentioned functional programming.
Yes.
Now, maybe it's because I'm self-taught and I never really went there, but to me, functional programming was always to get something done, you do A, B, and C. And to do A, you do 1, 2, and 3. Maybe my concept of this is completely wrong. Can you give me a bird's eye view of what functional programming actually is?
Sure. For me, it's about a constrained design space. So I have a set of operations on data that, or flow control of the program, if you prefer, that are based on data that I can use to compose any given program. And you say, oh, you cannot compose all of the programs with those pieces. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not with all the requirements for performance or for X, Y, and Z, but I can compose many of them, or I can compose most of them. So if I can chunk my problem space into A, then B, and C, and A is a parallelization operation, B is traversing each one of the elements and launching some side effect, asynchronous call, and then error handling, and then, so I'm given the pieces that I can use to design those solutions, and those pieces are constrained enough that there's a whole set of tools that can help you test with them that are not available for more general solutions. One example is like, if you have a function that takes an input and has an output, and you know the formula, so to speak, that for this set of inputs, this is the expected output, you have a tool that can generate n number of inputs for it. If your function actually modifies a global variable that is in some other place and all that kind of stuff, it's much more difficult to test it. So for me, functional programming is not about correctness that many people would do, or about expressiveness. For me, it's about like hacking stuff together as fast as I can with a set of with a set of assurances that I haven't clowned it up too much. Like it's not too wrong or too broken because I'm building it from smaller pieces that I know I've tried and tested. So that is the restriction of the solution space is what's really helping me build solutions faster, because I know the pieces that I can use to build those things. And it may sound like a little bit magical, and as I said, it doesn't apply to every single program all of the time forever, but it applies to a lot of them. And I've been shipping features for a number of years based on those principles. And even if they don't quite apply, like they've been there. And that's been the greatest, like the best thing about it for me, basically.
I noticed that there is an intro to FP series. FP is the functional programming that you wrote on your blog post. We'll add it into the show notes. And I myself have read it. I think that you actually go through the process of explaining functional programming pretty nicely. So I would suggest the listeners to actually go through it too.
Yeah,
it's a very nice functional programming series. You learn a lot. Also corresponds to Android domain, which is also great. And then because we are talking about functional programming, and you also mentioned Aero project itself, Maybe you could give us a rundown on what Aero project itself is for our listeners, and obviously the people who are listening. You can explain exactly what this project does and what are the different different parts of it, because I've obviously noticed some different parts it has. It has something called Aero FX, Aero Meta, and like a bunch of other different parts as a project.
So what happened is when we were with this group of friends, we were trying to learn functional programming together. Some of them knew from Scala, where there's already like a whole ecosystem built for it, same as there is for F# or Camel or Haskell. And we said, okay, maybe we can rebuild part of that stack so we can learn about it. And that was the beginning of the project. We built a certain set of tools that are now used by a lot of places. Like ThoughtWorks the other day said they are using it in all of their projects, and it's like a baseline for them. So it's a thing that you can bolt on top of Kotlin that gives you those functional constructs that are available across all the different languages that have support for them. And as the project grew, we said, okay, what would be fun to build, or what are we really missing? Oh, we want to build a concurrency framework similar to Kotlin X coroutines with the APIs that we know from those other languages, where we know that solutions have already been built. We took them, we put them in, we are iterating on them. So at the beginning, it was like this IO generic type. These days, it's more based on suspend functions, but the results is the same. How do you parallelize? How do you jump to the right thread? How do you do cancellation? And how you do resource management? And building those is actually a lot of fun. There was a lot of like, I understand now how the JVM works and those kind of things. And the funny part, it's so generic. You may find this interesting. There's also an iOS counterpart that is called Bow. It's bow and arrow. Bow is the iOS part, where they build the same things that are available in Arrow for Android. They're available in Swift. And they've been there for like a couple of years now, and they're used. I don't know how widespread they are. I think a little bit, but they're already available. And it's amazing that is also a possibility. We know people who are porting some of the things even to Dart, or some of the stuff based on Arrow, which in time was based on the Scala framework called CATS, which in time was based on there's this whole history of it. And building it is an exercise of learning and also fun. Like, it was so much fun to say, okay, how does concurrency work on the JVM? How can we rebuild it? How we can rebuild it with these specific constraints? And it did it, and it works, and it's been accepted, and we're going through like revision, whatever. 1.0 is coming up at some point. I'm gonna say soon, or this year or something, because I don't really know. But that was the story of it. And it's amazing that at some point what was our weekend projects grew to the point where right now it's like a ThoughtWorks adopt kind of thing. It was like surprising, but good, because it made sense. But it's not something that we created. It's not something that we invented. It's a space that we know was missing. We filled it, and it made sense. Like, it was just that it made sense, and that was it. And I'm so happy about it too. Yeah.
Do you think so? If I understood it correctly, Aero FX is kind of doing concurrency using Kotlin language. So is it a replacement for Kotlin coroutines library, but using the core functionalities from the Kotlin language, like the suspend functions?
Exactly. So you gave most of the pitch already. You know about this. So Kotlin, the language, has suspend function, start coroutine, suspend or return, and it has like maybe 5 or 6 functions. Everything else about coroutine scopes, actors, conflated channels, flow, flags, all those things are libraries built on top of that regular coroutine system. And we built something else that looks more like what you would find in those other languages. And now we're evolving it. So it is like in a middle ground between the original thing that we had, which was not very JVM friendly, and the thing that Kotlin S coroutine is, which is not very functional because it's very side effecty and eager and all those kind of things. So we want the same properties of one with the API of another. And I believe the latest iteration is getting there like really quickly. So try it. We know it's used in production. We know many people have been using it for years. And they say, okay, I don't care about the latest Kotlin S coroutines interaction because the version that I have is good enough for changing threads and cancellation and all those kind of things. So they are like, Yeah, I really I think that's the best pitch that we can do. Through that, we also did some metaprogramming, some compiler plugin helpers that can help us evolve in the future. So that's another Arrow meta project. Somebody from the community was doing lenses, which is a way of updating deeply mutable structures. We told them, hey, you're an external library, join in, work with us, let's be friends, let's just work on this together. And we shipped that result, and now he's another one of the friends. Another one was doing like all these different ideas, and we joined them together into an ecosystem where you can pick different parts of to build your application. You don't need them, we're okay. You want to make Scotland Gas coroutines with either, I'm fine. We're copying your either and shipping it as an individual library. Go for it. Like, it's fine. My agenda is a little bit of personal promotion, never deny that. Of course, that always helps. But my agenda was actually being able to go to people and do, hey, this is an either, this is an option, this is IO, this is X, Y, and Z, this is ParMap and Traverse, and it's always Traverse, and they get the joke, it's always Traverse. So they know those concepts. And now we can build whatever, because I can talk to them and say, oh, actually, that's just a Traverse operation over async. They say, of course it is. And I'm happy. Like, objective achieved. It took only a library and a lot of promotions and talks and books and all the stuff to get here. But hey, we're there, and that is the thing that makes me the happiest, because I can communicate with people in those terms, and they understand, and we have a shared language with other people from other communities, and I can walk up. Like I went to a conference and I spoke with the director of Microsoft Research, only based on the stuff that I know from Arrow applied to Haskell, which is the stuff that he did. Simon Peyton-Jones, it was. For me, it was just like, hey, Simon, do you know that we're working on like bifunctor IO thing? And he just went like, oh, I heard this is happening in Haskell too, but I haven't looked into it. It's like, that's good enough for me. I'm not the most brilliant, again, whatever, but I can have that conversation and I can access those places, and like other people can come and access that too. I'm happy. I'm happy. Like, job not done, but we got much, much further than we expected when we initiated the project. Because not only us learn a lot more about functional programming, the whole community learned, and damn, feels good.
I like the concept that you mentioned, that you actually leverage the community in terms of like getting onboarded other people to contribute to the project. That's something that's very interesting. And for our listeners, I think, because you've obviously mentioned a lot of like these technical terms, we'll add a link to the show notes so that you can have access to and read the documentation for the Arrow project. One particular part of Arrow project is this library, sub-library I should call, is called Arrow Ank. I think I'm pronouncing the name right. That's a very unique name, and I was reading up on it, and it's like, how do you even like come up with the names of these projects? Because this one particularly sounds a bit different and also has a backstory, I think, in terms of how these are being named. But like, how are you naming these libraries?
Ankh in particular is a clone of Tut, which is a Scala library. So Tut is for Tutankhamun, Ankh is for like, I saw the name written, it's like a whole thing. But basically, Rahul said one day, our documentation sucks. Let's write a documentation library. I like the Scala one. It's called Tut. So we're going to call ours Ankh. And I'm going to go in a hacking spree for a couple of weeks, and I'm going to come back with a solution. And I think that was the beginning of it. I believe other people got involved, and then at some point, I believe right now, like some of it is getting merged back into Docker, or we're contributing to Docker in some way. I don't really know. But that was the thing. So I feel like doing this, and Rahul is really good at that. I feel like doing something. I'm the CTO of my own company. So as long as I find the time, I'm okay with whatever. He does it. He comes back with a solution. And it's like, oh my God, this is outlandish, technically brilliant, and how do we like shape this back? I also did that a couple of times. Like, some people read my code, it's like, how do you come up with this? And I was saying, I don't know, I was drunk, maybe I didn't like, but it made sense at the time.
I love seeing names, especially now that we've gotten past the world of old Microsoft style Hungarian programming. I love seeing variable names and loop names. I remember creating a loop because I couldn't solve a problem that one of my colleagues came in and said, well, why don't you just not do this? So the loop got named after her.
Nice.
But my favorite naming contrivance was where there were 3 different cases, and this case took priority over this case, and this case took priority over this case, but then the 3rd case took priority over the first case. And the programmers called it the RPS system. And I was
nice.
like, well, why RPS? And they were like, well, that's rock, paper, scissors. And that was basically the RPS system was named for that concept because it was the same kind of analysis, and the name just always stuck with me as being very clever to help understand the system.
So we always have this question. It's like, do you name things based in what intrinsically they are, or what in mechanically what they do, or what it can potentially do? And this is a discussion that happens all the time. Is this a functor? Is this a mappable? Or is this a loop over a listy modifying thingies? Like, what is your preferred solution for that? Because I haven't come up with a good one yet.
I was going through your Twitter bio basically, and I wanted to touch upon this. I'm very curious at the section that says mistake-driven learning. Yes. And I think that's a new concept that you've come up with. Maybe you could give a rundown on what do you think this is, and maybe if others are also doing it or they should use this in their life.
So mistake-driven learning is sometimes, or I've been self-learning for a period of time when I was in certain companies or in certain positions, and I make mistakes, and I make a lot of them, but I also try to be fast in fixing them. So a mistake can be something as simple of being angry about a certain feature, speaking in a certain way in a meeting, talking to somebody in a certain way, and my manager will just come and say, no, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. And that keeps on happening, and it doesn't kind of go away, or at least I try to have enough self-reflection that I keep on seeing those problems every now and then. And it's also a way of apologizing when some of those happen, which happen from time to time, when I just go in and say something that is not the wrong way or the right approach. I'm not educated enough, or I don't know the right words, or I use the wrong English word, or I refer to people in a different way because I've never, I don't understand some of the social or economical problems or something because I didn't grow up in those places. Okay, I made a mistake, I'm going to do better next time, and you keep on growing about it. And that's one of the things that I think keeps me kind of sane, because if I wanted to do everything perfect and I didn't have enough, if I didn't forgive me enough for those kind of problems, and I would just it would be too much. It would be too much to handle. I'm already hard on myself very often, and I remember no, you're allowed to make mistakes. You can do these things. It's not the end of the world if you get a bad review, or somebody tells you there's a problem that you have to fix. And yeah, I have to put it on my bio, because if I don't remember, I can go in a really bad loop about it. So probably that's one of my weaknesses, that trying to maintain that positive learning going mindset. Otherwise it's easy to everything to fall down on you and getting too much into yourself, and that's not good. You have to forgive yourself very often.
Yeah, I think this is also one of those important points that I guess others would also relate to, because a lot of people are actually afraid of making mistakes, and then they are just if I made a mistake, then I'm I don't know what to do, how to handle this. But I like the concept that where you say it's become probably a term now, mistake-driven learning. You make a mistake and you learn from it, and then you keep on moving forward. And I guess that's one of the challenges for people who are trying to get into tech itself, right? When they try to look into some sort of a developer job or something, and they're very afraid about making mistakes. So looking into those particular areas, what other challenges would you think people have when they're trying to get into tech itself?
Yeah. So this is a fun one. I've interviewed with probably 90% of the companies in London, or even if I didn't, it felt that way. And it's funny in a sense because I can go into Twitter, I can go into these places and I can get an ego stroke. It's like, oh, you're doing amazing, you're great, technical, whatever. And then I go into an interview and I either choke or some of the questions I don't read completely correctly, or I rub some people off the wrong way, or I'm not at the technical level, or I'm too high of a technical level, all that kind of stuff. And the first 10, 20, whatever, they were devastated. Each and every one of them. Like, I remember, I think I interviewed for Google once, and after the interview, I just went into a ball. Like, oh my God, it's over. I'm never going to get out of this pit forever. And that wasn't the case. I continued interviewing. At the same time, where I was interviewing for a really serious, technical, very heavy place that I passed, I was doing some easier interviewing in other companies that I didn't even pass. It's like, what happened here? Oh, sorry, this exercise was not good enough for me. And I was like,
how do they relate?
Exactly. It's not a solved problem. Sometimes it's not even on you, and it's not a reflection for certain things. We're measuring some things that are the way that they are. It's the best that we could come up at the moment, but not taking them personally, I think, is a good way of advancing. So if you're failing your interviews in tech in particular, it's fine. Just keep at it, because at some point there's a space that you're going to find. You're going to have to practice. You're going to have to put the work. But in the end, it happens. Like, I had friends who took maybe 3 interviews in the same place to get a job, like within the span of less than a year. And what was the problem? Oh, no, this time, we didn't have the position available. We're looking for somebody more senior. We're looking for some other role. The role closed down because we had a better candidate. Whatever the reason was, they persevere and they got the job in the end. So sometimes it's even something external that is not up to you, the reason why you're having those problems in tech. And you have to find that space and like having that mental endurance to go through it, because it requires real mental endurance to go through some of it, is the advice that I would give to people who is either getting started or is like going through like a rough patch right now, especially with the whole coronavirus thing. I understand that people are having a bad time, but there's a place for you out there. Like, keep on trying and don't bash yourself too much.
Yeah, keep trying is a very good. Yeah, it's a very good advice, I think, because it's eventually going to happen. Yeah, but because
I was going to say, always remember that those people who are interviewing you have been interviewed for their position, so they know what situation you're in. They know what you're going through. They're, for the most part, except maybe at Google, they're on your side.
But because we're talking about practice and learning, like, this is a very something that has always been in my mind. Like, how do you, like, you personally are keeping track with all this new and shiny technologies? Like, because I think anyone who is trying to get into tech right now is mostly overwhelmed with so much different things that's happening at the same time. Like, say, for example, I'm an Android engineer. So for me, on the Android side, there's so many different things happening on the horizon. And if I say start with something, there's something new coming in, like, say, 2 more months or something. So how are you coping with this? How do you actually keep track of all this new and shiny technologies when you are working in your work job, or maybe on your own in open source?
So you can prioritize the things that you want to learn with the things that are coming, the things that are useful, the things that are necessary. One of the advantages of having such an obtuse interview system is that generally the coding interviews, the algorithm interviews that you're getting are not related to the day-to-day job. So it's just like, hey, can you sort a list, or like, what is the addition of whatever? Those exercises are framework independent. So it's a code golf. It's learning how to do Sudoku. You learn how to solve those exercises, you pass, and then you go to the job, and then you learn how to do the thing. And I tend to rely on that. I enjoy jumping technologies a lot. So lately, these last couple of years for me have been about becoming a generalist. Like you, I was worried that I'm an Android developer. That's everything there is, and I know Android. I'm going to start doing CI services. I'm going to start doing developer tools. I'm going to start doing websites. I'm going to be touching build pipelines. I'm going to be doing all these different things. And each one of them has its own ramp up time. And you sit there and then you do it, because same way as you become an expert of your thing in a job within a week, that's the best that the company can do at that moment. So oh, I'm not good at this. Well, there's nobody else trying it, so might as well, right? I'm learning through it in the job. If the job requires a specialist in a technology, they have to give you the space to grow, right? This is the same as the juniors. You have to build people in a technology. They have to learn in your own company. Some companies circumvent that by having very cookie cutter, like standard, strong, whatever, conservative solution, if you prefer to call them. I'm not a good employee at those companies, period. That's my thing. You're joining, we're doing Java 8, and then we're writing a backend with a Spring, and it's like piping things together. Okay, but I'm not the right person for it. And I tell that to the employers. I tell them, like, I jump across framework stack, I do the X, Y, and Z. Do you want that kind of person? Well, no, we want somebody who's really good with Angular or React, who can build websites really quick. Well, I'm sorry, that's not my profile. Thank you very much. I could do it, but that's not the thing that I enjoy.
Going back to interviews, I think people forget the fact that an interview is two ways. They're not just interviewing you for a position, you're interviewing them as a company to see if it is a good fit, if it is something you would like to do. And I think a lot of people have that concept of, well, I'm interviewing for a job, and if I get the job, I need the job. But you may not be fulfilled off of that job, so you need to be really aware. And one of the things I always advise is work out your list of questions for the interview, because one of the things they're always going to ask you is, do you have any questions for us? And know what you enjoy doing, and don't be afraid to say, I don't think this is going to work out, or don't be afraid to say, I'll get back to you. Don't commit, because this may not be the correct pairing.
Something that I've seen, and this is a cultural thing. Like growing up in Spain, there was the market in Spain is different than the market abroad, in the sense that people before our generation, especially, they tend to be in a company for life. So you join Telefónica, which is the big telco in Spain. You're set for life. You're expected to be there unless you break the whole system. You're not going to be fired, and you're going to be there. So you have to do the interviews, and you have very little possibility of moving around because the market is very stagnant. Whereas when I went to England, or when I went to Germany, or these other countries, I saw people were able to change those different jobs. And there was so much variety, especially in tech, that you have the possibility of changing companies. Even if you are within one of those countries where the market values tend to be more conservative, you can go international. You can get that additional value. And with that, it comes a whole set of possibilities available. And getting there, like, that was one of my goals after I finished university. Is like, I want to be employable. That was my thing. I need to learn a lot. I need to practice a lot. I need to talk to people. I need to read the books. I need to do everything. And I was super worried about being employable and having the set of skills that were necessary. And then I realized at some point, actually, this isn't Spain anymore. Like, I can go, and if I'm not a good fit for the job, or I'm feeling miserable, or I'm doing a project that I don't enjoy, I have the chance to go out and say, I can find something better, with a pay rise, with a pay decrease, with, like, there's this interview process in the middle, but at least I don't have to be miserable and stay at the same job, because there's nothing else out there for me, because the market is so stagnant, and we're privileged because of that. And that for me is one of the largest, like, things that I'm grateful for, like, rounded back all the way to, like, the book at the beginning. It's like being able to go out and not being limited to a small set of places where I can work and live in and do certain things. That for me is invaluable. And when I speak with my parents and with some of the people in here, my friends, they see that in me, that I say, I don't know, I'm not feeling well today. Maybe I should try another job. And they just go like, why are you leaving your job? It's for life. It's like, no, it's not like that in here at all. It's a whole different ecosystem here. And you can fend off for yourself. And it takes a little bit. It takes a little bit to get there, but once you get there, like, it's good. So fight for it. I would say if you're in that situation, like, fight for it.
I have a very curious question because I've been reading about you and I saw that you have a bit of experience around video games development. You said that also, I think. How did that go? Like, how did you end up into this domain itself?
So I finished university and I started looking for a job in the middle of like the '08 global crisis.
Oh,
Spain, global crisis. Like, I went on a suit. I had a suit at 40 degrees in summer in Madrid with like Castellano shoes, like proper like wedding shoes, so to speak, just so I can get hired in a bank. And I was like, no, this is not going to work for me. Like, the person who's interviewing me has a different set of interests. I don't see myself working with the suit, and I need to find something else. So I found an internship in Germany that allowed me to do video games. When I went there, the company was not good. Let's put it that way. They hired mostly interns from Southern and Eastern Europe, and the training was not really good, and like the company was just making like clones of different games with some taxes. I don't want to talk about it. Point is, I said, okay, this is good. Like, okay, video game development is not going to make me money. I might as well start learning Android proper. This was mobile development. I'm going to learn Android proper at the same time when I'm doing the job. And then I'm going to find a job doing mobile applications, which was really good, circa, like 2010, 2011 or something. And I did that for a number of years. And at some point, it's like, okay, I'm in a good position myself. What do I really want to do that is fun? It's like, I like programming languages. I like developer tools, functional programming. Like, all of it is like kind of close enough. If you read the papers, it's like, okay, I want to start doing developer experience and developer tools, so I know how the JavaScript VM works and how to do source mapping, so you know how the debugger works in like IntelliJ or something like that. Those kind of things like really interest me. And for me to be able to do that, I had to do a little bit of video game development to know that I didn't want to do that, and then a number of Android development for years that I actually enjoyed. And yeah, I'm seeing that game development even when I talk to people. I still do my own side projects. I follow the tech industry trends and all those kind of things. I know more than your average engineer, still not good enough to be a professional. And when I talk to them, it's like, yeah, there's no money on this. There's no, like, if you go indie, the market is saturated. If you go non-indie with a company, long hours, short pay, because they feed off of that. It's like, yeah, I'd rather do it on my own spare time, the game that I want, same as I do open source. This is my fun stuff that I don't want to hate. So I'm going to do it on my own spare time, on my terms, without a PM or somebody telling me, like, this needs to be done in 2 weeks. And let's just drop it at that. And it's a really fun word, because when you do functional programming and all those things, like performance, when people say performance, you just like mumble, like, yeah, well, maybe you have to change some patterns if things like measure performance, and if it doesn't go too well, just fix it. But you know what those are, and you know the relationship between mutability, memory layouts, functional programming, parallelization. Like, there's a whole trend going in video game development called entity component system, which is around parallelization, that goes really well with a reducer, which is a concept from functional programming. And all of that is like intertwined, because you know the people who are setting the trends are the ones who have read the papers, not the ones that are building the things ad hoc. So it's a good space in the theoretical and application side, and you try to find those people who can jump between the both of them. The creator of React is one of my favorites. Like, he loved OCaml so much, OCaml, F#, and all those. You say, how can I write OCaml in JavaScript? How can the UI? Oh, I'm going to read the papers about functional UI. I'm going to apply the concepts in JavaScript with this new syntax, so everything looks kind of functional. And then like 5-10 years later, there's React. It's a whole thing, and it's changing, and it's a compiler plugin that allows you to do that. That compiler plugin is now the thing that, okay, based on React, Compose happens, right? Compose is from Leland, who used to be a React Native advocate and he was doing things. So he understands React and he applies that to Kotlin. For that, you need a compiler plugin. So you need JetBrains and you need to do about like compiler, ASTs, and all that kind of thing. And all of that just to make UI. And it's the same in iOS, right? With what is the name of it?
Swift UI.
Swift UI. It's the same concept, same ideas. And it all came from one person who really liked OCaml, but had to write front end. So that's
pretty interesting.
Yeah, those are the things like I wish I could hit that. Not because it's now the great JavaScript trend. It's like, oh my God, he just took something that I like and something that I like, put them together, and it worked. And
it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Google has actually have had these engineers who initially worked in the game industry, and then they have actually tried to port these functionalities into the Android domain also. So I think this has happened in the past also, but I did not know that Jetpack Compose was basically borrowing the idea from React. So that's news for me. That's very interesting, and I hope all the listeners to the podcast would also be getting this nugget of information.
So
very interesting.
The functional programming concept, we say, like they're across different platforms, languages, and whatever. The concept of a React, of a reducer, store, or something, they are language agnostic, which means you can go now and check one of the courses on React, and there's a good chance like 80% of it applies to your Jetpack Compose. It says right now, remember mutable state of or something. It's actually memoize of a state of something like that in React. So you can map the concepts in your head. And if you've been working on the transformations for those, you know how they map from one another. So I would say if you want to get ahead of the curve, you can start looking right now how React works. So you can apply those same concepts to Android development, and there's a really low chance that they're going to come up with something that is outrageously different from what there is right now, because concepts are there. Like they're fundamentally basically the same. The implementation details may differ. And when you said, how do you learn about things and what are the things that I care about, I know how React works in the general sense. I know very little about the internals and also the internals of Compose and also the internals of whatever, but I know the general concepts that apply to them. And if I got to get into the internals, then is when I start learning about it. So big stories and then specialize only as it is necessary on those topics.
Speaking of video games, here's a fun question. What is your favorite video game?
Oh boy. If you go in Twitter, like this year, half of my tweets are like something dot play Outer Wilds. It may not be my favorite game, but I think about game at least once a week. It's like a 12 hours history, like investigation game in space with like you controlling a spaceship going to planets. The planets have gravity simulated, and then you're solving a puzzle because there's a time loop, and there's 22 minutes. Every 22 minutes, the whole universe explodes, and the soundtrack is good, the story is good, everything is good about it. And I think about it like every week, and I don't understand why. Like I like Dark Souls, I like fighting games, I like whatever. But I think about Outer Wilds every couple of weeks, and I say that was a damn good game. So play it. Go play it. Play Outer Wilds. Listen to Mission Schools. Watch Primal.
Drew, what is your favorite video game?
Right now, I recently got myself I got the family an Oculus, not an Oculus, the other one. Is the Rift? Yes, the Oculus Rift. So I've been playing a lot of VR games, and I love Beat Saber because it's a great exercise. It is a phenomenal exercise for cardio and for upper body. And in general, I've just really enjoyed some of the immersive titles that I've been looking at in there. It's great fun. One of the ones, which is actually a Steam game, is called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, which is a game where you're basically presented with a bomb that has several different types of switches and wires on it. And your job is to describe it to somebody who has a bomb defusing manual. And as you describe it, they tell you how to solve it.
Nice.
So it's a communication game. Really quite wonderful. How about you, Nishant?
I am into retro gaming, and I'm mostly doing these like pixel graphic based games. The one that I've actually been playing a lot since last year, this one is called Towerfall. You can get it on Steam, or if you want on Linux, or it's available on all platform basically. But it's a bow and arrow game. You have multiple players. You can play with many friends, and that's how I got into it. I was playing with my couple of my friends, and it got to a point where it became super competitive. And now I just love it. I play it on my own, and when we are together with the friends, we play that game too. It gets really competitive. I'll tell you that. At some point we had bets and like who's gonna win this.
Have either of you been dragged into the Among Us wave?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Paco is sus.
Oh, Paco is definitely sus. If you play board games with me, you know I'm the type that is holding like a card in his hand for the whole. All the knives in my house are like this long. I want it to be like very close up. You hear me when I'm doing that.
So along with the Oculus, I also bought a little 3D printer, just because we're mainly indoors right now. So I built up a gaming system and a workhorse system besides the Mac, because we're basically a Mac household. And I one of the first things that I made on the 3D printer was a little Among Us creature where you could actually take the top off and a bone would stick out from the inside.
Oh.
That's
a really good one. Do you hide them around the house for the kids to find?
You should do things like that. Put one near a vent.
Yeah.
Kind of sus.
Who's the imposter?
Paco, it has been fantastic having you on the show. We have learned so much, and it was such an incredible opening of that chapter from the book, which is an amazing read. If you haven't read the book, Living by the Code, Paco's chapter is absolutely outstanding and talks a lot about what we've talked about today, but other details as well. We can find you on Twitter at Paco Works, correct?
Correct.
PACOWORKS. Obviously, Nishant is Nis Rules everywhere on the internet. You can find me as Podcast Dru. We're going to head back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the whetted.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.